I promised a dead man I'd save 23 lives. The cost: breaking into Crane's stronghold, stealing evidence that could hang him, and trusting a woman whose brother my father killed. In part 1, I learned the truth. In part 2, I pay for it, with blood or justice. These lands know pain better than joy. Every mark in the sand tells a story, but folks rarely listen. I saw this tale with my own eyes, like the crackle of a fire at night. The shadows of the past don't leave. You'd best listen close. Out here, it's the only way to survive. Nightfall came to Blackwater Canyon, like a shroud being drawn over a corpse. The temperature dropped 20 degrees once the sun disappeared behind the peaks, and frost began forming on the windows of the boarding house, where I waited for darkness to deepen. Garrett arrived at midnight, dressed in dark clothes and carrying a canvas bag that clinked softly with tools. His face was grim but determined, the face of a man who'd made peace with whatever consequences might come. "You sure about this?" he asked, though we both knew the question was pointless. We'd passed the point of turning back the moment Mate Shun had walked away from that cemetery. "I'm sure," I said, checking the revolver I'd purchased that afternoon. I'd never been comfortable with guns. My father had taught me to shoot, but I'd always preferred words to bullets. Tonight, though, words wouldn't be enough. We moved through the town like shadows, keeping to the alleys and back paths where the moonlight couldn't reach. The Redemption mine sat 2 miles up the canyon, its structures dark against the starlit sky. No lights showed in the superintendent's office, but we could see the glow of the guards' fire near the main gate. "2 guards at the front," Garrett whispered as we crouched behind a pile of abandoned equipment. "But they're lazy. Crane hired drifters, not professionals. They'll be drinking and playing cards, not watching the darkness." And the back entrance. Through the equipment shed, like I said, there's a connecting door to the office that they probably don't even know exists. Built it myself 15 years ago when your father wanted a way to move sensitive documents without being seen. The irony wasn't lost on me, using my father's own secret passages to destroy what he'd built. We circled wide, approaching the equipment shed from the upper side where erosion and scrub brush provided cover. The shed's door was padlocked, but Garrett produced a set of picks and had it open in 30 seconds. Inside, the air smelled of rust and old grease. Mining equipment lay scattered in the darkness: drills, hammers, coils of cable, lanterns with cracked glass. We moved carefully, using a shuttered lantern that provided just enough light to navigate without being seen from outside. The connecting door was hidden behind a rack of tools. Garrett moved the rack aside with practiced ease, revealing a door that looked like part of the wall paneling. Beyond it, I could hear nothing. The office was silent, hopefully empty. Garrett tested the handle. Locked, but a different kind of lock. This one took him 3 minutes to open, his weathered hands steady despite his age. When the latch finally clicked, we both froze, listening for any sound of alarm. Nothing. We slipped through into the office, and I immediately understood why Crane had chosen this place. The walls were covered with maps of the mine, old survey charts showing every tunnel, every shaft, every vein of silver still waiting in the mountain's heart. A desk sat against one wall, its surface covered with papers and ledgers. Filing cabinets lined another wall, their drawers labeled with years and categories. "Start with the desk," Garrett whispered. "I'll check the cabinets. Look for anything dated within the last month: supply orders, payroll records, correspondence about safety inspections." I moved to the desk, my hands shaking slightly as I began sorting through the papers. Most were routine, equipment manifests, or assay reports, mining schedules. But then I found it, a letter from a territorial safety inspector, dated 3 weeks ago. "Mr. Crane," it read, "I have reviewed the structural reports you provided for the Redemption mine. I must strongly advise against reopening operations without extensive repairs to the primary support systems. The timber degradation documented in the attached survey indicates catastrophic failure risk in at least 6 major tunnel sections. Current estimates suggest minimum investment of $200,000 and 18 months of work before operations could safely resume." I cannot in good conscience approve your application until these conditions are addressed. Attached to the letter was Crane's response, written in his precise hand. Your concerns are noted but deemed overly cautious. Operations will proceed as scheduled. Your continued employment is contingent upon regulatory approval being granted by November 20th. Garrett, I hissed. Look at this. He crossed to the desk, read the letters, and his face went pale. That's not negligence. That's premeditated murder. He knows the tunnels will fail, and he's threatening the inspector to approve it anyway. We need copies of everything. The inspector's letter, Crane's response, the structural surveys. A sound outside froze us both. Voices growing closer. The guards were making their rounds. Garrett moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. Two of them coming this way, maybe 30 seconds before they reached the door. My mind raced. We couldn't go back through the equipment shed without the sound of the connecting door alerting them. The front entrance was locked from the inside with a bar across it. We were trapped. The file cabinets, Garrett said suddenly. Help me move them. We heaved at the nearest cabinet, sliding it quietly across the floor to block the front door, just as we heard a key scraping in the lock. The door pushed inward an inch, then hit the cabinet and stopped. What the hell? Came a voice from outside. Doors blocked. Must have shifted. These old buildings settle. Help me push. The door slammed against the cabinet with a boom that seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. Garrett and I were already moving, grabbing papers, stuffing them into our pockets, his canvas bag, anywhere we could fit them. Something's wrong, the second voice said. Go get Crane. Now, for a stuck door. Move. We heard running footsteps fading into the distance. Maybe 5 minutes before Crane arrived with more men. Maybe less. We need to go, I said, but Garrett was pulling open filing cabinet drawers with systematic intensity, scanning labels, pulling out entire folders. Not yet. If we run now with just these few papers, Crane will destroy everything else before we can come back with authorities. We take it all or we take nothing. He was right, but the seconds were slipping away like water through cupped hands. I joined him, yanking open drawers, grabbing anything that looked relevant. Payroll records showing the 23 hired miners. Supply orders for cheap, substandard support timbers. A surveyor's report detailing the exact locations where tunnel collapses were most likely. And then, in the bottom drawer of the last cabinet, I found it. My father's original ledger, the real one, not the copy Crane had offered me. Page after page of Marcus Ashford's neat handwriting, documenting 17 years of crimes. Names, dates, amounts paid, methods used. The redemption collapse was there, but so were dozens of other incidents. Claimed jumpers found dead in the desert, inspectors who had accepted bribes or disappeared when they wouldn't, competing mine owners whose operations mysteriously flooded or burned. This is it, I breathed. This is everything. Then we go. Now, we move to the connecting door, Garrett leading with the lantern shuttered down to barely aglow. Back through the equipment shed, out into the night air that felt suddenly precious after the suffocating office. We were 20 yards from the shed when lights blazed to life across the mine complex. There, someone shouted, by the equipment shed. Gunfire cracked through the night, bullets whining off rock and metal around us. We ran, stumbling over uneven ground, the canvas bag of documents clutched between us like a lifeline. More shouts behind us, more gunfire, and then the sound of horses being saddled. They'll run us down in minutes, Garrett panted as we reached the scrub line. We need to split up. You take the documents, head for town. I'll lead them away. No, we stay together. Daniel, listen to me. I'm old, I'm slow, and I've got maybe one good run left in these legs. You're young. You know these mountains from your time here as a boy. You can make it. I can buy you time. I won't leave you. Garrett grabbed my shoulders, and in the moonlight I saw tears tracking through the dust on his face. I've spent 15 years running from what I did, drinking to forget faces that won't leave me alone. Tonight, I have a chance to balance the scales, to save one life by sacrificing mine. Don't take that from me. Don't make my death meaningless like all those others. Behind us, horses were thundering closer. Shouts echoed off canyon walls. Garrett pressed the canvas bag into my arms. Go to the territorial marshal in Silverton. Give him everything. Tell him about the 23 miners. The Inspector Crane threatened. All of it. Promise me you'll see this through. Garrett. Promise me. I promise. He smiled then, and it transformed his worn face into something almost peaceful. Good. Now run, boy. Run and don't look back. He turned and ran in the opposite direction, firing his revolver into the air, shouting challenges that drew the pursuit like moths to flame. I heard the horses veer away from me, chasing after his voice, and I ran into the darkness with tears streaming down my face and the weight of evidence pressing against my chest. Behind me, Garrett's gunfire continued. 3 shots, 4, 5, and then silence that hit harder than any bullet could. I ran through the night, through scrub and over rocks, the lights of Blackwater Canyon growing closer with each stumbling step. When I finally reached the boarding house, I collapsed on the floor, gasping for air that tasted like grief and smoke. The canvas bag spilled open beside me, documents fanning across the floorboards like accusations written in ink and blood. Garrett was dead. I knew it with the certainty of sunrise, but he died the way he'd wanted, saving instead of killing, building instead of destroying, leaving behind something better than the man he'd been. In the mountains above, false dawn was beginning to paint the sky. I had maybe 2 hours before Crane's men searched the town. 2 hours to get these documents to someone who could act on them. I gathered the papers, my hands steady now despite everything. Garrett had bought me time with his life. I wouldn't waste the gift. I made it to the telegraph office as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, the operator still rubbing sleep from his eyes when I pounded on his door. Within an hour, messages were flying across the wires to the territorial marshal in Silverton, to the Mining Safety Commission in Denver, to newspaper editors in 3 cities. I gave them everything. Crane's threats against the inspector, the surveyor's reports showing imminent collapse danger, the list of 23 miners about to be sent to their deaths, and I gave them my father's ledger. By noon, the town was buzzing with news. By evening, territorial marshals were riding up the canyon with arrest warrants and closure orders. But Silas Crane wasn't a man who surrendered easily. I was at the Silver Bell Saloon, trying to wash the taste of smoke and death from my throat with whiskey that didn't help, when Machen burst through the doors. "They've taken hostages," she gasped. "Crane and his men. They've got the new miners trapped inside the Redemption. Says if the marshals try to enter the mine complex, he'll collapse the main tunnel with everyone inside." The room went dead silent. I was on my feet before I realized I'd moved. How many? All 23. They showed up this morning for their first day of work, and Crane locked them inside the moment he heard the marshals were coming. The marshals arrived minutes later, for grim-faced men with badges and enough weapons to start a small war. Their leader, a gray-bearded man named Morrison, spread a map of the mine across the bar. "Talk to me, Ashford. You know this mine. What are our options?" I studied the map, my mind racing. The main tunnel is the only way in or out for anyone who doesn't know the mine's layout. But there's an old ventilation shaft about 200 yards up the mountain. Connects to the secondary tunnel system. It's been sealed for years, but if we could open it, we could get men inside without Crane knowing. Morrison finished. "How long to open this shaft?" "An hour with the right equipment. Maybe less. And the stability? Your documents say the whole place is ready to collapse." The secondary tunnels were less extensively mined. They should be safer than the main sections. Should be. Morrison's jaw tightened. Not great odds. "It's all we have." "Then remove. Ashford, you're with me. The rest of you, surround the complex, but stay out of sight. If Crane thinks we've backed off, maybe he'll relax his guard." We rode up the mountain as the sun began its descent, painting the canyon in shades of blood and gold. The ventilation shaft was right where I remembered, a narrow opening sealed with timbers and sheet metal, half hidden by brush and erosion. It took us 40 minutes of hard work to clear the entrance, revealing a vertical shaft dropping into darkness. The smell that rose from it was ancient, stale air and rock dust, and something else, something like the breath of the mountain itself. "Who's going down?" one of the marshals asked. They all looked at me. Of course they did. I was the one who knew the layout, who'd studied my father's maps obsessively during those 5 years of trying to understand what he'd built. I was the one who'd started this whole thing by refusing to let sleeping demons lie. "I'll go," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'll need one man with me. Someone good with a gun, in case it comes to that." "I'll go," Morrison said simply. "My men can handle things up here." We rigged rope and pulleys, lit lanterns, and descended into the mountain's belly. The shaft dropped 30 feet before opening into a narrow tunnel that ran roughly horizontal. The walls pressed close on either side, and the ceiling hung low enough that we had to crouch as we moved forward. The tunnel air was thick with dust that coated our throats and lungs. Timbers groaned around us, with sounds like distant thunder. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness ahead, each drop distinct as a heartbeat. We walked for what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes, following my father's maps through intersections and branching passages. The farther we went, the more I understood why the redemption had been so profitable. Silver veins glinted in the lamplight, thick ribbons of ore running through the rock like frozen lightning. And I understood why 16 men had died. The support timbers were ancient, many of them cracked or rotting. In some sections, I could see where the ceiling had already partially collapsed and been hastily shored up with inadequate bracing. The mountain was waiting to fall. It was just a matter of when. "We're close," I whispered, seeing light ahead, not sunlight, but the glow of lanterns and torches. The main chamber should be just beyond this passage. We extinguished our own lanterns and crept forward in darkness, using the distant light as our guide. Voices reached us, echoing off stone. Crane's cultured tones giving orders, other men responding with acknowledgments. The passage opened into a larger chamber, carved from living rock. It must have been a central junction once, where multiple tunnels converged. Now it was a prison. The 23 miners sat against one wall, hands bound, faces showing various stages of fear and anger. They were young mostly, the kind of men who came west seeking fortune and found only the same hard labor they'd fled from back east. Guards stood at the tunnel entrances, 6 men I recognized from the Silver Bell, drifters and roughnecks who'd sold their guns to the highest bidder. And in the center of the chamber stood Silas Crane, looking remarkably calm for a man surrounded by collapsing tunnels and incoming law enforcement. He held a pocket watch, checking it periodically, as if this were just another business meeting running slightly late. "How long can you hold out?" one of the guards asked nervously, eyeing the ceiling as dust sifted down from a fresh crack. "As long as necessary," Crane replied. "The marshals won't risk collapsing the tunnel with hostages inside. Eventually they'll negotiate, and eventually I'll walk away from this with enough money to disappear into Mexico or South America. These things take patience." "And if the mountain decides it doesn't want to be patient," another guard said, "these tunnels sound like they're about to come down on our heads." "Then we'll move to a more stable section. The redemption has miles of passages. We simply..." "Put down your weapons." Morrison's voice rang out as we stepped from the passage, guns drawn. U.S. Marshal's office. "You're under arrest." The chamber erupted into chaos. Guards went for their guns. Morrison fired, dropping the nearest man. I fired too, aiming for another guard's shoulder, watching him spin and fall. The hostages dove for cover as bullets ricocheted off stone walls with screaming whines. And then the mountain spoke. A sound like God's own thunder rolled through the tunnels. The floor heaved beneath our feet. Dust and rock fragments rained from the ceiling in a choking cloud. Somewhere deeper in the mine, I heard the massive groaning crash of a major collapse, hundreds of tons of rock giving way, tunnels closing like a fist. "Out!" Morrison shouted. "Everyone out! Now!" The guards forgot about fighting, scrambling for the nearest exit. Crane stood frozen for a moment, his perfect composure finally cracking as he realized his leverage, the ability to collapse the tunnels, had been taken by the mountain itself. I ran to the hostages, cutting their bonds with a knife I'd taken from one of the fallen guards. Move. Back the way we came. Follow the marshal. They needed no encouragement, streaming past us toward the secondary tunnel. Morrison was shouting directions, his voice barely audible over the mountain's death throes. More sections were collapsing now. I could feel them through the stone, each one a shock wave that traveled through the floor like a struck bell. 20 miners made it to the passage. 21. 22. I was counting them like a miser counting gold, praying we'd get them all out before. The ceiling directly above us cracked with a sound like cannon fire. A support timber snapped, and suddenly rock was falling. Not fragments, but massive pieces, chunks of stone the size of wagons. Run, I screamed, shoving the last miner toward the passage. I saw Morrison ahead, saw him turn back to make sure everyone was clear. I saw the rock falling toward him, saw his eyes widen in realization that he couldn't move fast enough. And then someone crashed into him from the side, knocking him clear just as the rock hit. The someone who'd pushed him was crushed instantly, body disappearing beneath tons of stone. It was Crane. In the last seconds of his life, Silas Crane had saved a man instead of himself, had chosen sacrifice over survival. I'd never know if it was conscience, reflex, or simply the universe's sense of irony. But the devil had performed one good act before the mountain took him. We ran through collapsing tunnels, the mountain pursuing us with falling stone and closing passages. Timbers exploded like artillery shells. The air filled with dust so thick we couldn't see 3 feet ahead. I held my shirt over my mouth and followed Morrison's voice, praying we were heading toward safety and not deeper into the mountain's collapsing heart. And then, impossibly and miraculously, I saw stars. The ventilation shaft was still open, the rope still hanging down. We climbed one by one, hands scraping raw on rough rope, lungs burning with dust and exhaustion. Behind us, the mountain was sealing itself forever, closing the redemption mine as thoroughly as any human intervention could have. I was the last one up. As my head cleared the shaft opening and I gasped in the clean night air, I heard one final massive collapse below, the main tunnel system giving way, tons of rock filling passages that would never again know human presence. The redemption was finished, not by law or safety inspections or moral arguments, but by the mountain itself reclaiming what had been torn from its flesh. 3 weeks later, I stood at Garrett's grave as they lowered a proper headstone into place, carved into the granite were the words Mate Shun had chosen. He saved the last ones. That was enough. The cemetery was crowded that morning. All 23 miners had come, along with their families and half the town. The territorial marshal had come too. His arm still in a sling from where falling rock had clipped him during the escape. After the ceremony, as people filed away, May approached me. Her eyes were still hard, still holding depths of grief that time might ease but never erase. But something had shifted in them. Acceptance, perhaps, or at least acknowledgement that justice had been done in some small measure. "What will you do now?" she asked. I looked out at the mountains, at the mine that was now nothing but a sealed tomb, holding my father's ambitions and Crane's final redemption. I have one thing left to do, one last piece of my father's legacy to dismantle. Over the next month, I worked with lawyers and territorial officials to establish something new. The Ashford Foundation, funded by what remained of my inheritance after restitution payments. Its mission was simple: support for mining families, safety advocacy, and memorial scholarships for children who'd lost parents to the mines. I offered May the position of director. To my surprise, she accepted. "Not for you," she made clear. "For my brother, for the 16 men. For everyone who died so men like your father could add another zero to their bank accounts." "That's good enough," I said. The first thing we did was commission a memorial at the mine site, a monument listing every name of every miner who died in the redemption, with space left for future additions, because we knew the mountains would claim more lives before humanity learned to leave their silver alone. The second thing we did was fund a comprehensive mining safety inspection program across the territory, ensuring no other operation could pull what my father had done. The third thing, the thing that mattered most to me personally, was to track down the families of every person my father and Crane had harmed. Not just the miners, but the claim jumpers, the competitors, the inspectors who'd been bribed or threatened. Some were dead. Some wanted nothing to do with Ashford money, but enough remained that I could offer restitution, could at least acknowledge that crimes had been committed and payment was owed. It took almost a year to settle everything. By the end, I had almost nothing left of my father's fortune. The grand house in Denver was sold. The mining claims were transferred to the territorial government. The accounts were emptied into the foundation and restitution payments. I kept one thing, my father's study, which I had dismantled and moved to a small office in Blackwater Canyon. Not as a shrine, but as a reminder. The walls still held his maps and photographs, but now they were annotated with truth. Names of the dead written beside profit margins, dates of collapses marked on production schedules. On the anniversary of the mine's final collapse, May and I stood together at the memorial as sunset painted the canyon in shades of copper and gold. "Do you think it matters?" she asked quietly. "All of this. The foundation, the memorial, the money. Does it actually change anything?" "It didn't bring your brother back," I said. "It didn't erase what my father did. But 23 men are alive who would have died. Families have support who would have starved. Other mines are being inspected who would have kept operating unsafely." I paused, thinking of Garrett's last stand, of Crane's final choice. Maybe that's all justice ever is, not erasing the past, but making the future a little less terrible. May nodded slowly. "My brother used to say that silver was beautiful because it caught the light, that even buried in darkness, it was always ready to shine." She touched the memorial stone. "Maybe people are like that too. Maybe even men like Crane in the very end." "Or maybe," I said, "we just have to keep believing that redemption is possible, even when all the evidence says otherwise." A year later, a young miner came to our office with a proposal. He discovered a new vein of silver in the hills above Blackwater, potentially as rich as the redemption had ever been. He wanted to know if the foundation would fund its development. May and I looked at each other. The easy answer was no. The safe answer was no. The answer that honored the dead was no. "Tell us your safety protocols," May said instead. "Show us your engineering surveys. Prove to us that you can pull that silver out without killing anyone, and we'll consider it." The young man's eyes lit up. "I can do that. I will do that. I promise." After he left, I asked May, "Are we making a mistake? Supporting another mine after everything?" She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the photographs on the wall. Miners with their families, children growing up, lives being lived despite the shadow of the mountain. "Silver built this territory," she said finally. "It feeds families, funds schools, keeps towns alive. We can't stop people from mining any more than we can stop the sun from rising. But we can make sure they do it safely. We can make sure every man who goes into those mountains comes home at night. That's not a mistake. That's the work." So we did the work, year after year, reviewing proposals, funding safety improvements, supporting families when mines closed or accidents happened despite precautions. The foundation grew, extending beyond Blackwater to mining communities across 3 territories. I never married, never had children. The ghosts that haunted me, my father's victims, Garrett's sacrifice, even Crane's final redemption, didn't leave room for anything else. But I had purpose, and I had May's stern companionship, and I had the satisfaction of knowing that every day I spent undoing my father's legacy was a day when his shadow grew a little less dark. On my 50th birthday, I climbed to the cemetery alone. Garrett's headstone had weathered beautifully, the granite growing soft at the edges, but the words still clear. The 16 miners' graves were well tended. May still came every week with flowers, a ritual she'd never abandoned. I sat beside Garrett's grave and pulled out a letter I'd written the night before. A letter I'd never send because its recipient was long dead and buried. "Dear Father," I read aloud to the mountain wind. I've spent 22 years trying to fix what you broke. I've given away your fortune, exposed your crimes, turned your empire of silver into a foundation for the people you exploited. And you know what I've learned? That you were right about one thing. The work is never finished. There's always another mine that needs inspecting, another family that needs support, another young man like that miner with stars in his eyes and silver in his dreams. But here's what you got wrong. Justice isn't a balance sheet. Redemption isn't a transaction. You can't buy your way out of the harm you caused, and you can't erase sins by pretending they never happened. The only thing you can do, the only thing I can do, is wake up each morning and choose to be better than yesterday, to leave the world a little less broken than you found it. I'll never forgive you for what you did, but I'm finally free of hating you for it, and maybe that's its own kind of redemption. I burned the letter there on the hillside, watching the smoke rise toward peaks that held their silver tight in the darkness. The mountain had kept its secrets for millions of years before my father came. It would keep them for millions more after I was gone. But for the brief moment humans touched these hills, I'd made sure they did it with open eyes and clean hands. That was my father's legacy transformed. That was justice as close as I could build it from the ruins he'd left behind. The sun set behind the peaks, painting Blackwater Canyon in shades of gold and rose. Below, lights were beginning to glow in windows as families gathered for evening meals. Children played in streets where miners' boots had once trudged toward darkness. The saloon that had hosted so much grief was now a community center where the foundation held safety training. The silver was still in the mountains, waiting. It would always be waiting. But the men who went after it now did so with better knowledge, better equipment, and the support of a community that remembered what happened when profit mattered more than people. I stood, brushing dust from my pants, and looked one last time at the graves surrounding me. 16 miners. Garrett, even though he had no marker here, Silas Crane. All of them casualties of my father's ambition and their own choices. I did what I could, I said to them, to the mountain, to myself. It'll have to be enough. As I walked down the hillside toward the town lights, I didn't look back. The dead were at peace, or as close as they'd ever come. The living needed my attention more. In Blackwater Canyon, the ghosts had finally stopped screaming, and in the quiet that remained, the sound of children laughing echoed off canyon walls like a promise that the future might be gentler than the past. That was enough. It had to be enough. It was all any of us could ever do. See you around, my friend. I've got another story for you.